Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. On today's episode, we talk about the night of November 7th, 1983, when David Hendricks claimed he left his home in Bloomington, Illinois. However, when he got back home, he discovered that his wife and their 3 young children had been brutally murdered in their home. What followed was an intense investigation that led to his arrest and eventual conviction. Did they get the right guy, or is a cold-blooded murderer still on the loose? Let's get into the case of the Hendricks family murders right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Love and Murder, your weekly true crime podcast telling you cases of heartbreak that turn to homicide. I am your host, Kai. And in today's episode, we are talking about the Hendricks family murders, a case that still baffles Illinois and much of the United States today. Before we begin, I want to say that this episode is sponsored by My Lambs in Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now while you're listening so you don't miss a case. If you didn't know, you can also subscribe on our Patreon so that you don't have to hear intros like this or commercials that are coming up. You'll get Kai Rants, bonuses, and you'll be a sponsor of Love and Murder. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your delicious glass of BJ's apple juice. If you haven't gotten BJ's apple juice yet, what are you doing? murderandlove.com/BJ's. You'll be helping out Love and Murder, and you'll get $35 off your first year membership fees, which will mean it's only $20 for you. What do you have to lose except saving money on groceries if you don't do it? And let's get into some Love and Murder. David Hendricks was born in 1954 in Chicago, Illinois. He grew up in Morton Grove and Oak Park, Illinois. He was raised in a fundamental Christian family and became a member of the exclusive branch of the Plymouth Brethren, a conservative Christian denomination. This religious affiliation had a significant influence on his family's lifestyle, and moving forward into the future, his own family, like his wife and children, that family lifestyle and values. In 1973, at the age of 19, David married Susan, and their first child, Rebecca, was born in 1974. And they had 2 more children over the course of 4 more years. Susan Hendricks, born in 1953, was a devoted wife and mother, supporting David's business endeavors while raising their children. Which, if people don't know, being a stay-at-home mom is a job in itself that you get no breaks from. You get no sick time. You get no... Look. As a young man, David pursued a career in prosthetics and orthotics. As an entrepreneur, or wanted to be an entrepreneur, he started a successful business in manufacturing and distributing spinal braces. He called his company Cash Manufacturing, Inc. Now, Cash stood for, I'm going to try and say this, cruciform anterior spinal hyperextension. I guess it wasn't that hard, huh? Which is a specific type of back brace that David had developed and patented. In David's professional life, he continuously invented new orthopedic braces and was an innovator in his specific field, which contributed to his business's success. This business venture allowed the family to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle and move to a house on Carl Drive in Bloomington in 1982. Now, the business had 2 employees. One of them was David himself as an office manager, and the other one was Beverly Crutcher, who handled day-to-day operations. David's role as office manager focused on product development, manufacturing, and sales. Because of this, he often traveled to secure new professional customers, and he would also have late-night flights, but this was normal in his profession. Now, remember that I said he was a very religious person growing up, and even then that translated into his current family, his own family. But even though they had strict religious practices, the children did enjoy typical activities for their age, such as going to Chuck E. Cheese, borrowing books from the local bookmobile. Now, I don't know if that's something that families who follow the Plymouth Brethren don't normally do. So I don't know, but all I know is during the research, it says that even though his family followed this, they did other things like Chuck E. Cheese and stuff like that. So Now, on the evening of November 7th, 1983, David was preparing for one of his business trips. This time he was going to Wisconsin. Earlier that evening, Susan had left her home between 5:50 and 6 p.m. to go to a baby shower in Delavan, which was about 35 miles away. According to David, Susan had gotten back home at 10:30 p.m. When she got back home, they talked for about 20 minutes, just talking about different things, including the possibility of adopting a young boy. David also said that after Susan left for the baby shower, he took Rebecca, Grace, and Benjamin to Chuck E. Cheese, and they had gotten there around 6:30. They ordered a medium vegetarian pizza and a pitcher of root beer. The children played while David watched TV. After leaving Chuck E. Cheese, David said that's when they went to a local bookmobile. The bookmobile operator did remember seeing them at around 8 p.m. And then David said they got home at like 8:30 p.m., where he said that they played 2 rounds of hide and seek, and then the children got ready for bed. So the 2 rounds of hide and seek lasted for about 20 minutes. Then the children went to bed between 9 and 9:30. When Susan got home around 10, remember they talked and everything like that, and then she went to bed around 11. He said this is around the time that he left, sometime after Susan went to bed. This time he drove to Wisconsin to this business trip instead of flying like he normally does. During his trip to Wisconsin from Illinois, he made a lot of stops. So his first stop was a restaurant where he got some coffee. Then he took Route 51 north. He then took a break at another restaurant, which was south of Rockford. And he kept going like that. Each stop lasted no more than 15 minutes. He finally arrived in Wisconsin at around 7 a.m. and he had gone to Stephensport, Wisconsin. There he had a breakfast at Hardee's for a to-go meal, which his receipt said 7:17 a.m. Throughout the day on November 8th, he tried to get in touch with his family to see how everything was going, but no one was answering the phone. He also called his next-door neighbor and asked them to go check on Susan and the kids, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. Now that day, the family was also supposed to go to a family dinner. So David called a family member who they were supposed to be meeting, but the family member said that Susan and the children never got there. So now he's kind of freaking out because he can't contact his family, which isn't normal. And also nobody has heard from them. So he called the Bloomington Police Department to do a welfare check. So around 10:30 p.m., Officer Mike Hibbins and Detective Dennis O'Brien arrived at the house to do the welfare check. When they got there, they went around the house checking every door. They knocked on the front door. They checked in every window. They couldn't see anything. But when they got to the back of the house, they noticed that the back door was closed, but it was unlocked. So they went in the house using the back door. They walked around the house and saw nothing remarkable, but when they went upstairs to the bedrooms, that's when they found the entire family dead. Susan was 30 at the time, and Rebecca was 9, Grace was 7, and Benjamin was 5. They'd all been brutally murdered in their beds. Let's take a short commercial break. Hey, busy readers! Struggling to find some time to read all those books piling up on your list? I know how you feel. But I've got the perfect solution for you. Audiobooks. Audiobooks offers 300,000 titles in their vast library, bestsellers, new releases, and even your favorite classics, all available at your fingertips. And with a flexible membership plan, there's something for everyone, whether you're a casual listener or a bookworm like me. You can listen anywhere, anytime, thanks to cross-device syncing. You can start on your phone, pick up on your tablet, and finish on your computer without missing a beat. Plus, the Audiobooks app lets you listen offline, adjust playback speed, and bookmark your favorite moments. It's like listening to your favorite podcast, like Love and Murder, but even better. Use my link, murderandlove.com/audiobooks today to get your 30-day free trial and 3 free audiobooks. What are you waiting for? Start your next favorite read now. That's murderandlove.com/audiobooks. Grab your free books today. And now, back to the show. It appeared that the victims had been attacked with an axe and a butcher's knife. Based on the evidence that was found, it's believed Rebecca was killed first, and it looked like she was killed with a blow from the axe. She also had a cut on her face from the knife. All 3 children were found in Grace's and Rebecca's shared bedroom. Benjamin had his own room, but it looked like he had climbed into his sister's bed that night. Both girls were found positioned on their sides, so it could look like they had been killed while they were sleeping. Benjamin's body was on his back on the bed next to Grace, and one leg was dangling off of the bed. Now, with Benjamin's body, it looked like Benjamin suffered the most violence because his body showed that he had been hit multiple times with the axe in the face. So police suspected that maybe Benjamin had seen his killer, and so that's why the killer was so passionate about axing his face off, I guess. That is sick, sad, crazy. I can't even. The other thing is, remember, Grace and Benjamin had been in the same bed together, and both of their throats were cut with the knife before they were also attacked with an axe. Now, the crime scene had several questionable aspects that immediately raised suspicion with the police. For instance, despite the brutality of the killings, there were no signs of forced entry or even a struggle. Another thing was, despite the brutality of the crimes, the house was unusually clean. And someone who had seen the site later described it as, quote, the cleanest bloody crime scene he had ever seen. The blood splatter patterns on the bedroom walls let investigators know that the killer had stood between Grace and Rebecca's bed. So he's standing between the children's bed, and that's how he killed them. Also, based on where the killer was standing, they must have been sprayed with the blood of the family. And upon inspecting the crime scene, it did look ransacked, with drawers pulled out, toys were everywhere, clothes was everywhere, and some furniture was tipped over, but nothing was actually taken. There were no footprints. If the killer was sprayed in blood, there should have been footprints. There should have been fingerprints. There should have been smudges. Anything. There was nothing. Another curious thing was that the murder weapon, both the axe and the butcher knife, were still at the crime scene. They were found lying on one of the children's beds, and both of the blades were still covered in their blood. However, there were no fingerprints on it. They had been cleaned of the fingerprints and then placed neatly near the bodies. Both of the murder weapons also, the knife and the axe, were from the family's home. It was just that they were kept in different locations in the home. Also, there were no defensive wounds or signs of a struggle on any of the victims. As the investigation continued, detectives examined every aspect of the crime scene. They even took apart the plumbing in the house, they searched the neighborhood sewer pipes, and even conducted a landfill search, all in an attempt to find any trace of evidence. However, they found nothing. This is the kind of thing that would drive me crazy if I was an investigator. Because I'd be like, there has to be something. With a crime of this magnitude, there has to be something. And the fact that there's nothing. And it looks like they did everything they could. Now, police at first didn't suspect David, but then they started suspecting him because to them, he was unusually calm when they told him that his family had been murdered. They actually described his reaction during his initial interview as, quote, strangely calm and, quote, matter of fact. So to them, this was like, you should have been wailing and falling on the ground. But again, you can't say how somebody should act. You don't know. Maybe this is how he feels like he needs to show you he needs to act, but then behind the scenes, yeah, he's falling on the ground and everything like that. You can't say how somebody is supposed to grieve or react in a situation. How do you know he wasn't in shock? Everybody's different. During his interview, he told them everything that I already told y'all, where he was, when he left, everything like that. So they didn't have anything to like tie him to the crime. He also had his receipts saying where he was, what time he left. So there was nothing they could do. The only thing that made them consider him is because he wasn't wailing and falling on the ground, rolling around, grabbing at their pants, screaming, "No!" to the sky, stuff they thought he should be doing. Another person of interest was David's brother-in-law, but he had an alibi. And also, after they interviewed him, they gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. So they just canceled the investigation into him. Now, the bodies were taken in for autopsy, and the medical examiner examined the contents of the victim's stomach. They did find undigested vegetarian pizza topping in the children's stomach, and based on the evidence, a forensic pathologist estimated the children's time of death at around 9:30 p.m., which was a time that David was still home. So that's all they had to go by. They had no direct physical evidence, nothing directly linked to him, and I did miss something. Actually, when he got home and police interviewed him, they inspected his clothes. They didn't find blood stains. They didn't find any tears. They didn't find any physical evidence on him. No blood was found on his clothes, his skin, his hair. Nothing was found in his car. Nothing was found under his fingernails. And the crime scene also had no direct evidence tying him to the murders. So that little piece I forgot to say. But based on the fact that he was calm, according to them, strangely calm, and the fact that within the children's stomach, the medical examiner estimated time of death at around 9:30, which is when David was still home according to his timeline, they went ahead and arrested David and charged him with 4 counts of first-degree murder. He was arrested on December 5th, 1983. The case against him relied completely on circumstantial evidence, and the prosecution had a theory of a motive. So his trial started on March 1984 and was moved from Bloomington to Rockford, Illinois, which is 133 miles away, which is 214 kilometers. Now, prosecutors developed a theory, and they said this is what they think the motive was for the murders. They said it seemed like David was starting to change his lifestyle. It seemed like he was starting to really get like sexual, more sexual than he was in his marriage and in his religious beliefs. And it seemed like, according to them, he felt like he wanted a divorce. And we'll get more into that as the trial continues on. So the prosecution presented evidence as to what they thought the motive was. So they said David had alleged inappropriate behavior with female models that he had hired to demonstrate his orthopedic products. Some of these women actually gave testimony for the prosecution, saying that David had asked them to remove clothes. David had made intimate contact with them. For instance, during one of their private test fittings, he would accidentally brush their breasts, oops, my bad, I was just reaching for the scissors, or brush their upper backs, oh, my bad, I was just trying to put this, you know what I'm saying. But the problem is, he would ask them to remove their clothes and then do the test fitting in private, but the brace was actually worn externally. So the prosecution was like, why would you ask them to even remove their clothes if people are going to wear this over their clothes? Shouldn't you be doing a fitting over the clothes to see what that feels like, what that looks like? Why are you asking these women to remove their clothes? And are you asking men to remove their clothes? Or are you just like, hey, oh yeah, put this on and just, okay, it fits good, okay, out? Are you treating the men the same as the women, or are the women getting special treatment, if you know what I'm saying? So with the women testifying that David was doing this, the prosecution used their testimonies to suggest that David wanted a divorce, but he said that he thought divorce was a sin, so he turned to murder instead, which murder is a sin. So, yeah, okay. Anyways, investigators also noted that David had lost about 40 pounds in the year before his family's murder and had become more focused on his appearance. Oh my God. I better not lose any weight, because then police are going to look into that. Like, oh, Kai lost about 50 pounds, so clearly she's the murderer. So first of all, he can't act calm. Now he can't lose weight. I mean, he is a douchebag with what he did to these women, but that doesn't spell murder. It does spell that he's a creep. But being a creep doesn't mean you're a murderer. Like, they are really reaching here. There's no evidence that he wanted a divorce. There's no evidence that he was even going towards a divorce, but they're just saying he did this to these women, which is horrible. I'm not discounting that, but you're kind of reaching to turn this into a murder. Anyway, so he lost 40 pounds. He became more focused on his appearance. And the prosecution argued that these changes, combined with his behavior towards the model and his behavior at the crime scene and all of this, indicated a desire to start a new life. Wow, the reach-in. Oh my God. They also argued that he lived a double life, claiming that he had become materialistic and he was indulgent in luxuries that he denied his own family. According to prosecution, caused David great embarrassment and guilt. They're just making shit up. Am I wrong? They're just making stuff up. Where did you get this from? Did a key eyewitness come forward and tell you this is what was happening? Any friends, any family, any witnesses? It sounds like they're just making stuff up. So their primary focus was two things. The supposed timing of the children's death, and I'm going to get into why I said supposed, and the motive that they built up. So let's talk about the timing of the children's death. Their main piece of evidence was the undigested food found in the children's stomach. So like I said, the forensic pathologist estimated their time of death at around 9:30 p.m., even though David said he left for his business trip after 11 p.m. However, that's not an open and shut, because other pathologists said that the reliability of using stomach contents to determine time of death has been questioned, because post-mortem gastric emptying can take anywhere from 1 to 10 hours. And especially if the victim is in a stressful situation, it slows down even more. So that's why I said supposed. They just took that the forensic pathologist said 9:30 and they ran with it. But that's not clear cut. That's not hard evidence. So David's defense, they should have hard-hitting facts, and they should have come back like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, y'all are reaching, everything I was saying. But instead, his defense focused on corroborating his alibi, which, he wasn't there. He had a bunch of receipts and everything like that. Oh, by the way, even though I'm saying this, I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty. I'm just going by the facts that are being presented. So I don't want you to think that I'm on one side of the fence. I am totally not. And I'll tell you why after I'm finished the whole case. The defense also highlighted the lack of physical evidence linking David to the murders, saying that even though they did all of this, they found nothing on his hair, his skin, his car, his clothes, under his fingernails, which if he had done this, they would have found something, unless he bathed himself in bleach. And it was only he was only gone 1 or 2 days, 1 day. I think he was gone 1 day. So it's like, unless you literally took a bath in a vat of bleach, we should have found something. Remember, they said that the killer would have been sprayed in blood, and they found nothing on David. The defense also reminded the prosecution that the crime scene itself had no evidence tying David to the killings. The defense also challenged the prosecution's timeline, saying that there is no certainty in determining the time of death based on the stomach contents. They also questioned the relevance and prejudicial nature of the testimony regarding David's interaction with models and his religious background. I mean, his interaction with the women were horrible, and you made those women feel very, very violated, you creep. However, that is apples and oranges. It really has nothing to do with this case. Was it wrong what he did? Yes. Did it have any correlation to his family being murdered? No. Now, what they didn't challenge, though, was some of the prosecution's evidence. And when I say that, I mean like the order of the killings. So based on what they say David's timeline was, so according to them, it's around like 9:30, and you could clearly see he left around 11. There is no way that he could have done this all by himself in that short timeline. Everything that was going on based on forensic evidence, that couldn't have been done in that short of a timeline. He did this, he cleaned up, he got in his car, like he cleaned up. He got in his car. He's so clean that no blood or anything transferred to the car, and then he went on his merry way. There's no way that that timeline could have been achieved if it was just him. They also failed to say that another thing that was pointed out with the weapons, with the blood splatter and everything like that, it did suggest that it was two perpetrators they should be looking for. They also failed to bring forward that the evidence was carelessly handled by the investigating team. For instance, the containers identified as the children's stomach contents did have material inconsistent with their known preferences. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if Rebecca hated green beans, just for instance, there were green beans in her stomach contents. But Rebecca doesn't eat green beans, you know? So these are the things that they failed to bring forward. So the jury deliberated for only 5 hours, and they came back and found David guilty. Now, while the death penalty was on the table, the judge who was over the trial refused to sentence David to death, saying that, quote, "I cannot in good conscience apply the sanction of death unless I have been convinced of his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. I have not, and mere belief is not enough," end quote. But he did make it clear that he wasn't criticizing the jury for performing their duty. So basically what happened is the prosecution was pushing for the death sentence, but the judge didn't really know if David was guilty or not. So he said he couldn't really go for the death sentence. That's, I don't know how I would feel if I was a person whose family was murdered. I feel, because I don't know if David is innocent, but let's just say in a world where he is, I'm completely innocent. There's nothing linking me to the murders. You're using complete circumstantial evidence. And then I'm declared guilty. And then even the judge says he's not sure if I'm guilty. I don't know how I would feel. So David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He actually got 4 life sentences to be served consecutively. Following that, some people weren't really sure that they got their guy. Most people were satisfied with it because I'll get into that. Most people were satisfied with it, but some people were not. They were questioning it. One such person was journalist Steve Vogel. He had attended every single day of the trial, and every day he was there, he became increasingly concerned by what he heard. So he decided to write a book about the questions like that he felt some people were afraid to ask. So in 1989, he released a hardcover book called, quote, Reasonable Doubt. With this book, it became a bestseller, New York Times bestseller, and it helped shape the public opinion about the case. Like some comments said, for instance, readers often comment that they must continuously remind themselves that the story is real, testament to the fact that truth is stranger than fiction. The book has also been used in college-level criminal justice courses to explain and illustrate the legal concept of reasonable doubt. Stephen's work was also praised for its impartiality and clarity. Even David wrote a letter to Steve acknowledging the book's positive effect on people's perception about him. However, he also expressed frustration with some aspects of the book, including what he perceived as a lack of moral outrage at the behavior of the non-investigating police and prosecutor. Now, this is what I'm saying. This is what I was saying before. Before this crime and before this book came out, many people in the area didn't lock their doors at night, but now they did. And also, they initially assumed that David was guilty after his arrest because they trusted 100%, most people, the legal system. According to Steve, today, about a third of those familiar with the case believe that David is guilty, a third believe that he's innocent, and a third are on defense. So that's actually going to be my poll question. And I'll have those three options out as well. So it's going to say, do you believe David is guilty? The options are going to be yes, no, or undecided. And like I said, around that time back then, the public perception of law enforcement changed with people. So now a lot more people were more willing to accept the possibility that police and prosecutors sometimes get it wrong, which that was not the case before this case. Also in 1989, during one of his appeals, David accused his brother-in-law of being involved in the murder of his family. David said his brother-in-law hated him and was jealous of his success. He also said in his appeal that his brother-in-law was showing some suspicious behavior the night of the murders. And it's interesting to note that he did work at the hospital, the brother-in-law. That night, the night of the murders, he had gone home with a set of bloody scrubs that he asked his wife to wash. When she asked him where all this blood came from, he said they belonged to a doctor at the hospital. What? Wait. So a doctor at the hospital was doing surgery, and he said, here, brother-in-law, take this home and wash these scrubs for me and then bring it back? Don't they have their own laundry system? What? And as his wife, I would have asked the same thing. Like, why are you washing the doctor's scrubs? Shouldn't that have been put in like the contamination? Like there is literally like this hamper for contaminated garments that they're supposed to wash a specific way because you're not supposed to be bringing other people's blood home to your house. So did she just wash it without question? Because I would question. Now, at the time of the murder, the alibi was for the brother-in-law. His wife, Martha, claimed that he was home with her all night. Later on, she changed her story to claim that he had left the house that night to, quote, lift weights. So was she covering for him? Did he tell her, hey, babe, if anybody asks, I was home tonight, okay? And she was like, okay, you brought home bloody scrubs from a doctor, and now you're being all weird and telling me to say that you were home. Well, okay. Now, in 1990, the Supreme Court of Illinois announced that they would reconsider David's case. The decision actually led to an overturning of his conviction in 1991, setting the stage for a second trial. During the retrial, the court ruled that testimony about David's religion and alleged womanizing was prejudicial and unnecessary. So basically, you can't bring this forth in court because it had nothing to do with anything. This decision actually drastically altered the landscape of the case because the prosecution now had nothing to stand on. Because remember, this all went back, basically his religion and his womanizing all went back to what they said was the motive. Now they have no leg to stand on. So the court also said that the testimony of the models were inadmissible because they didn't provide evidence of Hendricks engaging in a pattern of what they said, quote, escalating sexual aggression. So for instance, in the original trial, the prosecution had the models testify out of order. Basically, for instance, they had the model with the least aggressive claims testify first, and then they finished their testimony with the model who had the most aggressive claim. The Supreme Court said that the prosecution did this to show a pattern of, quote, escalation, and they did this on purpose to show like, oh, so he can go from caressing a woman's cheek to full on grabbing a boob, which means now he can go to murder. That's what they were trying to paint it as. So the least aggressive sexual maneuver, I guess, according to them, they put that woman first. How demeaning is that? You know what I'm saying? Like, you were violated by someone, and these men then put you on the stand to say yours don't matter that much. Like, yeah, you felt uncomfortable that you were in a room alone with him and you had your top off, but all he did was brush your hair off your shoulder. that doesn't matter as much as this other woman who he brushed the hair off her shoulder and, lightly caressed her cheek. You couldn't possibly feel as uncomfortable as her. Like, are you serious right now? They just wanted to get their case out of the way. So they were just like least aggressive to most aggressive just to prove that he was escalating. That's freaking insane. And I don't think that would actually fly nowadays. The court also found, remember that they said you can't include religious motive, because they said, quote, there was no showing that the state's allegation about being ostracized was the sole option available, that the defendant, Hendricks, feared being ostracized, or that the family's death would in any way benefit the defendant, end quote. So in this new trial, where the prosecution is now scrambling because everything they had, everything that there was in their back pocket to use against David, they could no longer use. They have nothing. So the retrial lasted 7 weeks, during which the prosecution presented only their circumstantial evidence, because that's all they had. And without the background of religion and sex, the circumstantial evidence proved insufficient to convince the jury beyond a reasonable shadow of a doubt. So, on March 29th, 1991, the jury took 12 hours to deliberate, and the original verdict of guilty was reversed, and the jury acquitted David of his family's murder. This outcome was actually unprecedented in Illinois' jurisprudence, with legal experts saying, quote, no one can remember the Illinois Supreme Court ever reversing itself before or since in a capital case. Following this acquittal, David was released from prison after serving 7 years behind bars. Once he was out, his life took a new direction. He just worked to rebuild his future. And 2 months later, 2 months after regaining his freedom, David and his new family moved to Sylvania, which is a suburb of Toledo. He has a new family after only 2 months of being out? Maybe somebody thought he was innocent and married him while he was in jail. Stranger things have happened. So he moved to Sylvania and opened a new prosthetics and orthopedics business. Since then, he has actually remarried. He's on his 4th wife now, and he currently lives in Orlando, Florida. Wow, you're on your 4th wife? I wonder what the psychology behind that is, like why all the divorces. Not saying that you can't divorce, but I'm just saying in his situation, 4 wives, I wonder if there's a psychological reason for that. Like, are the wives thinking that maybe they made a mistake and he did murder his family? Can he not get over? I'm not saying get over, because no, you can't get over it. I'm saying, is it really affecting him that much that it ends up affecting his marriage, meaning his first marriage, everything that happened to his family, is that really affecting his other marriages? I wonder what's the psychology behind the reason he's on his 4th wife. But it does look like he's sticking with his 4th wife, because the last anybody heard, they had celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary, and they do have 2 children. Professionally, David has continued to be successful in his business ventures. And in 2008, Martha, remember the brother-in-law's sister, held a press conference to accuse her now ex-husband of the crime and pled with investigators to look into him. Law enforcement officials said, nah, we're good. No one else has ever been charged with the murders of Susan, Rebecca, Grace, and Benjamin, and it's been, to this date, about 41 years after their death, and it still remains unsolved and a mystery. And that is the case of the Hendricks family murders. What did y'all think about that case? Have you heard of this case before? Now, what I wanted to say, when I said that I'm still on defense, I don't know if he's guilty or not. My only thing, which again, it's circumstantial evidence from my point also, it just seemed kind of funny. And again, I'm not saying he's guilty. It could totally just be a coincidence. It just seemed kind of funny that this was the time that he decided to drive, when he normally flies. So he decided to drive this time, and then it's like he stopped every so often to make sure that he got receipts to show where he was. You know what I'm saying? So that was my only thing with it, which again, that's completely circumstantial, and it could just be coincidence, pure coincidence. He could have been stopping all this time to get receipts so that he can get, reimbursed on his taxes. So you can actually track his mileage so that when you're taking that off on your taxes, they can't say, well, we don't think you did this. Well, here's receipt A, B, C, and D. So take off, you know what I'm saying? It could just be for tax purposes. But that's the only question that I had. Secondly, I don't understand why investigators are not looking into the brother-in-law, because that is highly suspicious. You brought home scrubs from a doctor? That's like the crazy, and polygraph tests are not always right. They're not always accurate. And so they just have the case sitting there. What harm would it bring to now investigate the brother-in-law? What harm would that bring? You investigate him, you clear him, he's good. You investigate him, you find he's guilty, you close a case. What harm could it bring? But anyways, the poll question that's going out is asking, do you believe David is guilty? Like Steve said, a third of people think he's guilty, a third of people think he's innocent, and a third of people have no idea what they think. I'm in the third that have no idea. I have no idea. I don't like that the only evidence that they had was circumstantial. For you to accuse somebody, there needs to be hard-hitting evidence, not what you think. That's not how any of this should work. I think he's guilty according to them, so that's what they go after. And as you can see, when the court said that you can't bring in this circumstantial evidence, the prosecution had literally nothing. How are you going to build a whole case off of circumstantial evidence? That's crazy. So I normally read out the poll results, and this is a full episode, so I would have read out the poll results for last week's full episode. However, right now, Spotify is down, so I can't see the poll results. So I will just read your comments. So last week's episode was Dalia DiPolito. If you didn't hear that case, the link to that case is in the show notes below, so go ahead and check that out. I did ask you, have you ever come in contact with a person who was so manipulative that you fell for it and you couldn't even see it until after everything was done? I asked that question because Dalia was so manipulative that it helped her actually in her court case, in jail and everything like that. Christina Bobo said that she remembers seeing this case years ago, but couldn't remember any of the details. And she said, thanks for sharing this one. She was crazy and deranged for sure. And definitely, Christina, you're welcome. I did want to share this. I wanted to get that case out there. So you're welcome. Butcher Pete said, sheesh, it almost makes you not want to date a duplicitous con artist sex worker. Yeah, well, Butcher Pete, it actually makes you not want to date somebody who is manipulated AF, right? That's why one of my questions was, but how do you know they're going to be manipulative until it's too late because they've already manipulated you? That is the question. How do you get past that manipulation? How do you see it as it's happening in real time? But anyways, and that is all the comments that I have for you. I guess hopefully next week the Spotify will be working and I can see the poll report. If you don't see me put out a poll today, that's because Spotify is not coming up and I can't post the poll. Hopefully it's resolved soon. But even if you don't see me posting the poll question, you can always leave your answer in the comments below. So again, the question is, do you believe that David is guilty? The answer is yes, no, or undecided. You can also add to it as to why you don't think he's guilty, or why you do think he's guilty, or why you're undecided. I already told you why I'm undecided, so I would love to hear from you and read your comments in another episode. So that is all I have for you, as I said already. If you want to be a supporter of Love and Murder and get extras, you can definitely join the Patreon if you're tired of all the commercials. Join the Patreon, you get 0 commercials, and you get case extras, so like pictures of the crime scene, pictures of the people I'm talking about, court cases, videos, everything like that, if the case has it. So you get all of that in the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. But if you want to support Love and Murder in another way, then all you have to do is simply share this episode. We have a saying that you share this with everyone you know and everyone you don't. So go ahead and share it with your friends through WhatsApp or share it with them through text messages. And then go ahead and share it on your social media. You could share it in Reddit. You could share it on Instagram. You could share it in Pinterest, wherever. Share it with everyone you know and everyone you don't. And like I end every full episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder.